Marshall Curry, the director, is currently here. I'm going to ask him to come and introduce the film briefly in a moment. And yeah, he'll be here afterwards to answer your questions, so please stick around for that.
Thanks for coming, and thanks so much for including the film here. We've had a great screening the other day, and our film, you're going to see a couple of things, but my film is the one that follows, and the goal of it really is to kind of ask more questions than it answers. And so, anyway, just wanted to let you know that I'll be here when we're done to maybe have a conversation about some of those questions. So, anyway, thanks again for coming. I want to bring up Sam Coleman, who's a cinematographer and co-director on it.
First of all, I found when I watched the film, I was agreeing with people I didn't expect to be agreeing with, and I was sort of swaying one way and then swaying the other way. How conscious were you about being unbiased in making film?
I think the film has a point of view, and I think it's good for films to have a point of view, but I think it's a complex point of view. And you know, as we started making it, we felt ourselves stretched as we would meet new people. You know, the story kind of dropped in our lap when my wife came home from work one day and said that 4 federal agents had walked into her office and arrested this guy, Daniel McGowan, who was somebody who I knew a little bit through her, and you know, he wasn't what I expect when I think of a domestic terrorist. And so, so we kind of jumped into the story, not really sure what would happen, and each time we met somebody, you know, whether it was the spokesman for the ELF or other ELF members, or the investigator or the prosecutor or the arson victims, every time I think we sort of felt our point of view broadened and stretched, and so then as we edited, we tried to do the same thing, to kind of take the audience on that journey. And you know, ultimately I think on, you know, a lot of the topics, I was a religion major when I was in college. I was very, you know, eager to figure out if there was God and how we should live our lives. And when I was graduating, one of my friends said to me, you know, I'm still confused, but just at a higher level. And I sort of feel like that's how we felt about this project. Is, you know, we're still a little confused, but hopefully it has kind of elevated the understanding of some of the issues. But I guess, you know, the question of bias, I feel like there are some, you know, if the movie had presented itself, if reality had presented itself in a way that was not complex, that had a very clear good guy and a very clear bad guy, then the film would represent that. So I don't, it's not as if I have something against films that have a strong, you know, singular point of view.
Sure, yeah, brilliant. Open up the questions from the audience now, if anyone's got any questions. So, Chuck, sorry, do you mind waiting for the microphone? Sorry, then we can all hear. Brilliant, thanks.
I read a book a few years ago called In a Dark Wood. I don't know if you've read it, but it's about the First Movement, and the guy makes the point that people did die when they spiked trees. You know, people did die, and that didn't come out in the film. Are you conscious of that?
Yeah, I'm actually not aware of anybody ever dying from a spiked tree. I think that there was one accident that happened, where somebody was hurt, but I don't think that wasn't an Earth Liberation Front action. So I think what the lawyer at the end who says that of the 1,200 ELF and ALF actions, nobody's ever been hurt. I think that wasn't considered an Earth Liberation Front action, so that's what they're talking about.
Thank you. Any more questions from the audience?
At what point did Storyville get on board and the various other partners?
Yeah, so Storyville, BBC Storyville, came on pretty early. They, you know, Nick Fraser saw the trailer and some scenes, and we kind of talked to him about a lot of the footage that we had gathered at that point. And he's been a great supporter of it since. So yeah, we're looking forward. I think our BBC broadcast will be late fall or winter. I don't know that it's been decided exactly yet. But and then if you're in the United States, our PBS broadcast will be in September, and we're doing a theatrical release in the United States that starts in New York on the 22nd of June, and we'll roll out in other cities after that. So if you have a Facebook page or if you have Twitter followers or something, spread the word.
I mean, but when you say early, we'd already shot for at least a year by that point, so early in the development of us raising any money for the movie, but not
First of 5 years.
exactly.
So do we have any more questions from the audience?
So is this the first movie, Marshall, that you've co-directed? And how was that different from your other movies? And what was it like to Sam to be a co-director with somebody who's nominated for an Oscar? That's kind of, you know, just kind of interesting, creative team. And how did you decide to work together? And just maybe talk about your creative process together as co-directors.
Yeah, well, we decided to work together because, well, we had been linked up through sort of a funny set of circumstances. But initially we were sort of developing another project when Marshall's wife came home and said that Daniel had been arrested. And at which point I turned to Marshall and he turned to me and we were like, let's go make this movie. And Marshall did go on and make that other movie that we were working on, but this was really the one that sort of I wanted to stick around for. You know, it was great to work together. I mean, you know, we definitely don't, you know, always see eye to eye on stuff, but I think that's like a natural tension that I think really worked for us. You know, and wasn't easy at times, but I think that was good. And you know, Marshall had shot his first film at that point. He hadn't made Racing Dreams yet, but he was kind enough to let me shoot this one, so that was cool because that's what I love doing. And I don't know, it was a good process. I don't know quite what else you're curious to know.
How was that process different for you, Marshall, working with someone else like?
I mean, in a lot of ways, it wasn't different. I mean, I like having people involved in the creative process, and you know, we had an editor that I edited with, and he was super involved, and Sam was super involved. So, you know, I like making films collaboratively, and we pull people in from the hall at, you know, where we work and get friends and solicit a lot of feedback. So, yeah, so it's been good.
Have we got any more questions? There's a chap in the back, sorry, on the right here, sorry, yeah.
I can do it without the microphone. I was just wondering, he was sent away to prison 4 years ago. Was that, what took that long to get the film released? I just wondered.
Well, a couple of things. One was fundraising. So, you know, that we kind of decided to put up money to get us through the shooting. And then we needed to get real money after that to pay for editing and music licensing and color correcting and all that sort of stuff. So that took a while. And also access. You know, a number of the interviews that are in the film were actually shot after Daniel was in prison. So the interview with the prosecutor and folks like that. And so just kind of working to get that access, to get the wire recordings, the recordings that the government made. It took us years of you know, getting lawyers to write Freedom of Information Act requests and then appeals when they got rejected. And so all of that kind of, the archival gathering was this massive effort where we had a bunch of interns and people who were just pouring through tons of footage that we got from lots of different sources. So, and it took about 1.5 years to edit. So, so that's, yeah, it's a long process.
Thank you.
We had another chap just over on the right here with a question.
Yeah, two questions I just wanted to ask. The first one, I was interested to know whether you wanted to make a film on this topic before your wife told you the story about the person getting arrested at her work. And secondly, how much research did you do prior to the shooting? And how much did you leave to be discovered during the process of shooting?
It was not a topic that I had ever considered making a film about until it was dropped in our laps. So we didn't do a ton of research. I mean, you try to be prepared when you're about to go do an interview. So read a number of books and that sort of thing. But it was not. We were shooting as we were doing that research. So and honestly, sometimes I feel like you want to do enough research so that if somebody tries to spin you, you know what the answers are to be able to push, but not so much that you get disassociated from how an audience member will see a film who you presume does not have a background in it. And you know, if you're too familiar with the jargon, you can start to make a very insider-ish movie that's hard to reach a wider audience. So.
Thank you. There's one chap at the back, and then we'll come down here after that.
Any plans for a theatrical release in the UK?
We are talking to a theatrical distributor about doing that, yeah, so I'm hoping that will happen.
Keep you posted.
And just to, actually, questions of keeping you posted, we do have a website, which is If a Tree Falls Film, and also a Facebook page where we kind of keep updated about screenings and any news.
So my question was about what's happening with Daniel now. He's obviously been incarcerated for what, 4 years, and is he doing any chance of parole? Are there appeals? What's going on there?
Daniel's still in prison. He's got 3 more years to go, maybe a little less if he gets good behavior, but in the United States, 2 things to answer your question. One is that because he struck a plea deal, there's no going back to that agreement, and it can't be breached in any way. And also in federal prison in the U.S., you have to serve 85% of your time at the bare minimum. So even if he's doing great and doesn't cross any lines, he'll have to serve 85%, which is significant. Like when you hear people get these tremendous sentences and they get half time, that won't be the case for him. And he is in this prison now, which is particularly restrictive, as the movie sort of alludes to at the end, but wasn't something we really had the ability to discuss as much maybe as we would have liked, but for the purposes of making a movie, it just seemed that we kind of had to end it there. But since his incarceration, an NGO in the United States has challenged his designation there and challenged the not just his, but the entire institution of this thing called the CMU, the Communications Management Unit, and they've just recently in the last few months been judged by a judge has decided that they can move forward on 2 of the 5 or 6 grounds that they had appealed for, and one of them was retaliatory claims, and the other is due process, because Daniel has not been able, and his other inmates have not been able to. There's no information about why they've been transferred there, and so they can't therefore appeal to the government to be moved out because they have no basis to stand on. The only basis is the actual what's written is what their crime was, which is sort of meaningless because they were already incarcerated for those reasons.
Right, we've got another question, chap in the middle at the back. Just 1 second, get the mic up to you.
Is there an address which people can write letters of support to Daniel if he's happy for that?
Yeah, I mean, he would love it. The address I don't know offhand, but his family and friends have set up a website called supportdaniel.org. And you can find out everything you need over there, for sure.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any more questions from the audience at all? Down here in the front row. And we've got a lady in the middle there.
Hi, just curious, you've got, one of them, Daniel was in the flat for 7 months. I don't know whether you knew how long he was going to be isolated like that when you started filming, but as a filmmaker, it's kind of tricky. You've got one guy in one situation, and there's not much you can, how did you choose what to do with him, or how much time to spend with him, before realising you were obviously going to have to go out and do all those other things as well, which no doubt you would have done, but just in terms of the balance between spending the time with him and what else you guys needed to do to make the film?
Well, I mean, I'll just say quickly that it was a real challenge, of course. I mean, a guy in house arrest does not make for very cinematic circumstances. And also, his life was so tedious going through this experience, and yet you're making a movie, you don't really want to, be tedious in the way that you're describing stuff. And then even on top of all that, Daniel was in this position early on, which we don't really go through in the film for reasons that are narrative purposes and stuff like that. But essentially, he had claimed his innocence for the beginning of
the time that we got to know him, he was fighting the charges. He obviously didn't want to go away for life in prison. So it took months until he eventually came clean to us that he had done these acts. So it was a very tricky time to decide that we were going to make a film about this. But I think ultimately we knew we either had a film about a guy that was wrongly accused, or we had a film about a guy that did these acts, and then we would figure out how and why, and eventually get to that with him.
Can I just very quickly then say, because I was curious, because he was there telling me all about what he'd done, and I was thinking, why are you doing this? Surely your defence is that you didn't, or that choice that he made, and that was going to be kind of my next question for you. Is like, how do you figure out whether this guy's done it or not?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't know, and I think we kind of sort of suspected, that he probably had done it, because when he first started talking to us, really he was talking about the politics behind the government going after these kinds of activists as terrorists, and really wanted to talk about that rather than the fact that he had been wrongfully accused. And so that sort of made us believe that probably he had done it, but it was not clear until much later, until he told us.
The way that in the beginning of the movie he tells us that he's done it is actually not the way that it played out when we spent time with him. So really, when we first began editing the movie, we thought we would have a first act that would be where you weren't sure whether he'd done it, and then you would find out that he had. And as we kind of worked on that direction, it became clear that whether he'd done it or not wasn't actually what was interesting, and to try to make something dramatic out of that wasn't that interesting. What's really interesting is, why did he do it, and how did this happen that this guy ended up facing life in prison for this crime? And so once that was decided, we just said, let's just open the movie with him saying, in 2001 I did these fires, but it's more complicated than you think. And that's the movie, is how is it more complicated?
Do you feel like there's much public understanding of why people do these things? Because what came across to me in a lot of the interviews was that several of the interviewees were saying, well, it's never either it's never acceptable, or I can see why they did it, but it's because of their background or because of how they grew up or something like that. Whereas I sort of got the feeling that a lot of people, particularly the people in the trade, didn't really seem to sort of grasp these sort of environmental issues surrounding it, and I suppose the sense of urgency that these activists obviously felt that they needed to do something. So, do you feel like, I suppose, particularly in America, is there much public understanding of why they're doing this, and sort of?
I would say no. I would say almost everybody in America thinks that arson is just crazy. And so, that's one of the challenges for the group, and I think, probably the #1 critique of this as a tactic is that most people, when they see it, that's all they see. And if you were hoping to provoke a conversation about old growth trees being cut, most of the time an arson just provokes a conversation about arsonists. And so, most mainstream environmentalists in America hate the Earth Liberation Front because they turn the conversation into terrorism instead of environmentalism. And so that's there's a kind of tactical argument that happens in the radical environmental movement about whether property destruction on a small scale or property destruction with arson is ever acceptable. But I would say, if your question is whether it has broad support, I would say it does not have broad support or broad understanding.
But just to add, I think the real purpose for us, I think, or at least one of them for sure, making this movie was to sort of take these very polarized views of the world and let their arguments then kind of be seen together in one film, so that people could move on and kind of rise above this, figure out ways forward that do address the really real crisis that we all have to deal with in this world, but don't ultimately alienate people. So, you know, we've talked about it being in some ways a cautionary tale for activists to sort of rethink about the way that they, you know, look at the effectiveness of their actions, and also for the government to look at how acts that they perpetrate against activism, or you know, in response to activism, either you know bring people into the democratic process or repel them from it. So, you know, that was sort of maybe the hope of the movie then.
Do you have any more questions? There's a guy in the middle and then some further dots after.
Yeah, I thought the movie was excellent, and you know, I thought it was quite emotional. I was almost in tears at the end. Has it changed your politics, and what is your own personal perspective on the environmental movement?
Yeah, I mean, sure. You know, I think for me, anyways, I'll just speak just personally. I think has it changed my politics? I think it's maybe given me a better way to look at how activism might, you know, find pitfalls and also ways of being more effective. And sort of what I was just saying before. I mean, the way I live my own life, I'm not quite sure it has changed too much, because I think this became more of a film about tactics and about how does one effectively make change. And I think, you know, environmentalism was something I certainly cared about prior to making this film, but I wouldn't call myself an environmental activist previously. It's not, you know, I think we're filmmakers more than anything. Yeah, I mean, watching Daniel, like, you know, clean plastic bags in his kitchen and, you know, compost in his freezer while he's under house arrest was, you know, pretty effective, for me anyways. It's the first time I'd seen anyone do that in New York City, and especially in those circumstances, and I think that had an effect on me, certainly, about choices in my own life.
No, I'd say similarly. I mean, yeah, no, I don't think I have much more to add. I would say that it has not dramatically changed my opinion about the environment, although learning about, you know, what clear cutting and old growth was informative to me for sure. In terms of tactics, I guess it has kind of elevated my thinking about a complex issue.
There was just can you pass it to you there? Thanks.
Hi there. I love the film, by the way. When you're releasing it in the US, are you reaching out to environmental groups to co-present or help you market? And if so, how's that going?
Yes, we will. You know, we are trying that. It's actually kind of difficult. You know, even when we were licensing, when we were looking for archival footage, we found out that the Wilderness Society had a great library of archival footage of old growth forests and old growth forests being cut. And so we, you know, had a number of conversations with them, and then when they found out that the movie was about the Earth Liberation Front, they wouldn't even license us footage of old growth forests because it's so radioactive. They just don't want their name to be used in the same paragraph with the words Earth Liberation Front. And so we have that same challenge, I think, with a lot of mainstream environmental groups. I think that universities are going to be a great partner, and you know, there are some, I mean, honestly, we feel like even for mainstream environmental groups, it is an important discussion to have about tactics, and we also have had really kind of encouraging responses from government, from, you know, the prosecutor and the detective about the possibility of using it to work with law enforcement, to help them understand that certain reactions at protests will radicalize people, and certain reactions will bring people into the process of, you know, the democratic process. So, you know, we're casting our net wide, but because it's not a polemical film, it's sometimes difficult to get, and because it's about such a controversial subject, it's sometimes difficult to get mainstream environmental groups to put their name behind it.
Yeah.
Right, so chap at the back right, question.
Hi, I would just like to express my opinion, actually. I like very much the fact that you increased the idea or the notion of terrorism who is a terrorist and who is not a terrorist. I would just like to say that I think that Daniel is not a terrorist. It just, in my opinion, it just happened to be probably with the wrong people to collaborate and work for probably a better world in his own perspective. But I think with the wrong people. And I think that Ferguson definitely was not the right person in order to show a better perspective of, to protect the environment or save the United States from all this, yeah.
Thanks.
Is he a terrorist?
Sorry.
No, I don't think so.
No, I mean it's Ferguson.
I'm not sure if he was aware of what he is, because he was a drug addict, and I think he was under influence, and that's very scary, because I think sometimes these people who are leading groups, revolutionary or anyway, they're just messing around with movements, with social movements. I think these people are wrong people for, leading social movements. That's my opinion.
Was there a question for Marshall as well? Or?
No, I just expressed my opinion.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
That's great, thank you. The back there.
Can I get a second one? I'm just interested in that comment about law enforcement. I wonder whether you could compare the film with Battle for Algiers, which I think was shown to a number of military organisations around the world.
Yeah, I mean, I remember hearing that they were looking at that as they were discussing other possible quagmire military expeditions. So I think definitely understanding, the murkiness of what you're getting into is always helpful before you stride into a situation.
Have any more questions from the audience then? The lady back right.
Sorry, you first.
Sorry. I was going to say, sort of just at the end there, the ALF was thrown in with the ELF, and sorry, certainly in Britain the ALF is a very specific group with very specific aims and very specific ways of working. And I don't know much about the ALF in America, but I do think it's interesting that it's kind of relevant here too. Because we do have that type of group, and I just wonder if they worked in the same way as the ALF here, actually attacking people and digging up people's grandmothers and things like that, because I kind of see them as slightly different to this group. I just didn't know, the ALF were just kind of thrown in there, and I was a bit confused about who they were in America.
Sure. So in the United States, the Animal Liberation Front, there's a lot of overlap between the ALF and the ELF. Some of the fires that were set in the name of both. So like the horse slaughterhouse had sort of an environmental component and also an animal rights component. And I think probably most of the folks who were involved, there are very shared sympathies. And when they actually created the ELF, they used the ALF as its model in terms of the guidelines and setting up a press office and that sort of thing. I think that the ALF was more active, has been more active in Britain than in the United States, and certainly the digging up graves and things like that is something that I've only heard about over here.
Slightly different.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we've got time for just one more question. There's a chap in the back row on the right.
I love the film, by the way. I was just going to say, how have you found... Oh, sorry. Hi, I love the film, by the way. I was just going to say, how have you found the mainstream media reacting to the film? Just because they tend to be the ones that kind of throw the terrorism word around. And secondly, is there a plan for DVD release as well?
Well, it's still in its early release. So we've been playing festivals. We premiered at Sundance and have played a number of festivals around the United States. So we've gotten some mainstream media attention, and it's been generally pretty positive. There's a story that's going to be in the New York Times this weekend, and I think that people have appreciated the complexity, but as the audience grows wider and wider, both through the theatrical release and ultimately when it's on television, I think we expect that there will be some of the kind of criticism, oh, you're making a movie that apologizes for terrorists and that sort of thing. But I think that that's really going to be coming from people who haven't seen the movie. Because when you watch it through, I certainly don't see it as a justification. I see it as, you know, it doesn't seem to me to be excusing things. It seems to me to be trying to understand them. And those are different things. And you know, I think the fact that it ends with the federal prosecutor who threw these guys in prison saying this is a complex issue means that it's not just liberal filmmakers who are saying it. It's you know, it's people who've put their lives, you know, who've dedicated their lives to protecting America against these people saying it too. So maybe we'll get less than we would fear.
I'd just like to thank Marshall and Sam again for coming down and answering our questions.
Thank you. Thanks so much for including us, and thanks for coming out.